Vera, move. That was how Dorian said it. Not quietly, not in a whisper meant only for me. He said it the way he said everything that night. Loud enough for the clients from Meridian Capital to hear. Loud enough for the waitstaff to freeze with their champagne trays. Loud enough for Isabel, standing 3 feet behind him in a white wrap dress, to drop her eyes and cover a small, practiced smile with her fingertips. I was holding my portfolio, the bound presentation of 18 months of design work on the Langford, Dorian's flagship mixed-use development on Chicago's North Shore. I had my hand flat on the cover. He had his hand on the other edge, pulling. "This presentation isn't appropriate for tonight," he said, his jaw tight, his eyes not quite meeting mine. "I'll handle it." I didn't let go. "Dorian." My voice was very even. "These are the design credentials the Meridian team specifically asked to review." "Vera." That was his warning voice, the one he used when he thought I was embarrassing him. A man named Miles, one of Dorian's senior project directors, stepped half a step forward from the cluster of colleagues nearby. Actually, the Meridian partners did ask. "Miles." Dorian cut him off without turning. "Give us a minute." He looked back at me and pulled the portfolio from my hands in one clean motion. Not violently. Just decisively. The way you take something from someone, when you've decided their opinion on the matter, has expired. "Thank you, sweetheart," he said, and the word landed like something cold and wet. He turned back to the Meridian group, smiled, and said something about the design phase still being in refinement. Isabel drifted closer to his side. She had a thin kind of beauty that made you feel guilty for noticing it, and she used her supposed heart condition the way some people used umbrellas. To make others slow down, accommodate, open doors. She'd been back in Dorian's life for 4 months. We never discussed it directly. He said she was sick. He said he was just being decent. I stood at the edge of the reception area, with my hands empty, and 200 people watching a version of me they would remember for a long time. I went to the restroom. I didn't cry. I checked my reflection, pressed a cold paper towel to the back of my neck, and then noticed something wrong. I won't describe it in detail. I'll only say that I had been carrying a piece of news for exactly 9 days. News I'd been waiting for the right moment to share with Dorian. And standing in that marble bathroom on the 14th floor of Chicago's Four Seasons, I understood that the right moment was never going to come. I called a car from my personal phone, not the one linked to Dorian's family plan, my other one. Northwestern Memorial's ER was cold and efficient. The attending physician asked me twice if I wanted to call someone. I said no both times. I signed all my own paperwork. I didn't fall apart. I sat in the waiting area afterward under fluorescent lights, holding a small sonogram image I'd been carrying in my wallet since the day I found out. I looked at it for maybe 30 seconds. Then I put it back in my purse, zipped it shut, and called Zoe. She answered on the first ring, which told me she'd been awake. "I know," she said, before I got a word out. "Someone posted a clip from the gala. It's already circulating." "Book me a flight to New York," I said, "earliest available." A beat of silence. "Are you leaving?" "Yes." Another beat. Then the sound of her keyboard. "There's one at 5:50 a.m. out of O'Hare." "Book it." I took a car back to the penthouse. Dorian wasn't home. The lights were off except the entryway, the way I'd set them on the automated timer every night for 4 years. I walked to our bedroom, pulled a single carry-on from the top shelf of my closet, and packed only what was mine before I was his wife. My architectural licensing credentials, my laptop, my passport. 1 week of basic clothing. I didn't take the diamond tennis bracelet from last Valentine's Day. I didn't take the Cartier watch. I didn't take anything he'd selected and given to me with that particular smile he wore when he was proud of his own generosity. I did take the sonogram image. I left it on the kitchen counter, weighted down by his coffee mug. The one that said Chicago Architecture Foundation on the side, the one I'd gotten him when he was honored at their annual dinner 3 years ago. I had been so proud of him that night. I left the sonogram there, not as an accusation, as a fact. He deserved to know what he'd been standing next to all evening without knowing it. At 4:15 in the morning, I rolled my carry-on out the front door. The November air off Lake Michigan hit me like a flat hand. I didn't flinch. I didn't look back. By 9 a.m., I was in New York. Dorian's assistant called at 11. I let it go to voicemail. By noon, Dorian himself called 3 times. I answered the third one. "Where are you?" His voice had that particular quality. Not quite worried, not quite angry, hovering somewhere between the two like he hadn't decided which was more useful. I'm safe, I said. Vera, what you did last night, leaving without a word, this is. Dorian. I watched the cab move through midtown traffic, yellow taxis in all directions. I didn't leave without a word. I left a document on the kitchen counter. Silence. Come home, he said finally, quieter. We'll talk about this. No, I said. I hung up and blocked his number. 20 minutes later, Zoe sent me a text. He called your father. I expected that. My father, Leonard, who ran a regional commercial real estate firm in Cincinnati and had introduced me to Dorian at an industry conference 6 years ago. Leonard, who considered this marriage a kind of legacy project. He called me an hour later and used the word unreasonable 4 times in 7 minutes. I listened. I said, Dad, I have to go. I didn't call back. 3 days later, Dorian froze my supplementary cards. All 4 of them. His attorney sent a letter offering to discuss reinstatement. I read it and forwarded it to my own attorney, a woman named Carol in Midtown who specialized in high net worth divorce and whose retainer I had quietly funded from my own account, an account Dorian had never known about. Because here's what Dorian never understood about me. Even after 4 years of marriage, I had always had my own account. I had always had my own work. He knew I was an architect. He knew I'd taken fewer commissions since we married, that I'd stepped back from the bigger projects, traveled with him, attended his events, filled the role of Mrs. Aldridge, the way you fill a frame with a photograph. He assumed this was because I had traded ambition for comfort. He never asked. He never knew that Studio V, the boutique design firm behind 3 of the most celebrated mixed-use developments built in the United States in the past decade, had only one lead architect. He never knew that the firm's anonymous founding partner, identified in all press materials only as V, had a valid marriage certificate with his name on it. I had kept the 2 lives deliberately separate, not out of deception, out of self-preservation. Because I had watched what happened to women who handed everything to one address. So when Dorian froze my cards, I felt nothing but mild irritation, the way you feel when your GPS takes an unnecessarily slow route. I called Zoe into my office at Studio V's Soho location and told her it was time. The first letter went to Dorian's attorney of record on a Monday morning. It was a formal cease and desist from Studio V, notifying Aldridge Development Group that the design credentials they had been presenting to investors and partners for the Austin Meridian project, including the exact design renderings from the Langford, were being used without proper licensing authorization, and in violation of Studio V's intellectual property rights. The Austin project was a $2.1 billion development deal. Dorian had spent 14 months building it. By Wednesday, the lead Meridian Capital partner had called Aldridge's offices, twice requesting clarification on the design attribution issue. By Friday, the Austin deal was on pause. I heard all of this through Zoe, who heard it through her contacts. I was in the middle of a client meeting when the news came in. I finished the meeting. I went back to my desk. I felt nothing vindictive about it. I had expected something sharp and hot. Instead, I felt only clarity, like a room after the furniture's been rearranged, and you realize it should have always been this way. Dorian called from a blocked number 2 weeks later. I know it's you, he said. I assumed you'd figure it out, I said. You're going to burn 2 years of my work over a fight at a party. I turned away from my drafting table and looked out the window at Canal Street. I'm going to enforce intellectual property rights that should have been enforced contractually at the start of every project. Your attorney had 4 separate opportunities to request proper licensings. It wasn't done. Vera. You should have your attorney call Carol Simmons. She'll explain the process. I ended the call. 2 months after I walked out of our penthouse, Dorian found out where I was. Not through his investigators, who had been looking in all the wrong places, but through an announcement in Architectural Record. Studio V was confirmed as a participating firm in the Urban Land Institute's annual Design Leadership Summit in New York. The opening keynote would be delivered by V. That was how he found out. The ULE Summit was held at the Javits Center in March. The gala was on the second evening, and I had been told that Dorian's team had registered at the last minute. One of Zoe's contacts on the planning committee mentioned it offhandedly, like it might be information I'd want. I said thank you and went back to my keynote notes. I wore a structured black blazer over a silk ivory top. My hair was pinned back. I wore small stud earrings I'd bought for myself in Soho 2 months ago. Cost $40, meant nothing to anyone but me. The committee chair, Dr. Brannigan, met me at the VIP entrance and walked me in through the main doors. The room was full. Developers, architects, investors, institutional partners. A room full of people whose opinion of themselves was very high and whose attention was right now entirely directed at the entrance. I didn't look for Dorian. I didn't need to. I could feel the exact moment he saw me. A particular stillness that moved through that side of the room like a current underwater. I let Dr. Brannigan guide me to my table. I did not turn my head. He found me in the VIP reception after the formal dinner. I was holding a glass of sparkling water, speaking with the director of a Houston Development Authority, when I heard his footsteps. That particular gait, always slightly too purposeful, like he was trying to prove he belonged wherever he was going. Vera. His voice was controlled, careful. I recognized the effort it was costing him. "Excuse me for just a moment," I said to the Houston director, who nodded and stepped back with the easy grace of someone who has witnessed this kind of thing before. I turned to face Dorian. He looked thinner. The shadows under his eyes were deep. He was wearing the charcoal suit I'd helped him select for exactly this kind of event. A fact that sat between us without being spoken. "You're V," he said. "Yes." "For how long?" "Studio V was founded 8 years ago, 3 years before we met." He processed this. His jaw moved. "All that time, you never said anything." "You never asked what I was working on," I said. "You asked me to attend things with you." I attended. It's different. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded document. I recognized the format. Generated by his legal team, dense, with consideration language and equity figures. He held it out. 15% of Aldridge Development, he said. Transferred to your name, outright, no strings. We reinstate the licensing agreement, the Austin deal gets back on track, and he paused. His throat moved. "I know I handled the gala badly. If you come back, we can talk about all of it." I looked at the document. I looked at his hand holding it out. "Dorian," I said, "do you remember signing a set of financial disclosure documents in September 2 years ago? Your assistant brought them to the house on a Saturday morning. You were heading to a charity golf event. You signed them at the kitchen table while you were waiting for your car." He frowned. "General corporate disclosures, yes." "No." I looked at him steadily. Those documents included a co-signatory clause on 3 of Aldridge's construction loan instruments, naming me as a financially responsible party. It was buried on page 11 of a package that was presented to me as routine household financial management. I signed it without understanding what I was signing, because you told me it was routine. The color in his face shifted. Those instruments were used to underwrite aggressive development loans that have since been flagged by the SEC for irregular structuring. My name is on them, Dorian. My signature, certifying my knowledge of financial arrangements I was never informed of. He stared at me. On Monday morning, Carol's office will file a formal complaint with the SEC and the Illinois Attorney General's office, citing fraudulent use of spousal co-signature and misrepresentation of financial instrument purpose. The document he was holding lowered slightly, almost imperceptibly. "You can't," he started. "The complaint is already drafted. I've delayed filing it by 72 hours. I reached into my blazer pocket and set a thin folder on the high-top table between us. That is a divorce agreement. Standard terms. No claim on Studio V, no claim on my independent accounts. The Aldridge equity you're currently offering, I don't want it. I want my name off those loan instruments. My attorney has prepared a corrective addendum. Your signature on this agreement tonight initiates the corrective filings." He looked at the folder. He looked at me. "You planned all of this," he said quietly, not angry, something closer to bewildered. "I filed the cease and desist 5 weeks ago and waited to see what you would do. You registered for this conference 3 days ago. I knew you would." "Vera." He said my name differently than he used to, like he was trying to locate something that had moved. "I made mistakes. What happened at the gala, Isabel, everything, I handled it wrong. But we were married for 4 years. We built things together. You can't just..." "Open the folder, Dorian." He opened it. I watched his eyes move across the first page. His breathing changed. "Sign it," I said. He pulled a pen from his jacket. For a long moment, he held it above the signature line without pressing down. The room moved around us. Voices, laughter, someone across the room making a toast. He signed. I took the folder and passed it directly to Zoe, who had been standing 12 feet away the entire time, and who walked it immediately to Carol, who was waiting in the corridor outside. Then I picked up my glass of sparkling water and looked at Dorian one final time. Isabel has been treating a manageable arrhythmia for the past 2 years, I said. Not a transplant-level heart condition. I confirmed it through her physician's public licensing records. A cardiology practice in Evanston. A manageable arrhythmia. She told you she was dying, Dorian. She told you that for 4 months, while you were pulling my portfolio out of my hands and telling clients my work wasn't good enough. I watched what happened to his face when I said that. I did not feel satisfaction. I felt only tired and very certain. Take care of yourself, I said. I turned and walked back toward the main reception. The SEC investigation moved quickly. By the time spring arrived, Aldridge Development Group had been formally notified of the filing. 2 board members had retained independent counsel, and Dorian was working out of a subleased office in the Loop because the company's main space had been subpoenaed. Leonard called me in April. He didn't use the word unreasonable this time. He said he'd spoken with Carol and reviewed some of the documents. He said he was sorry. I listened. I said I would call him soon, and I meant it. Isabel, I learned through a former mutual acquaintance, had moved to Portugal in February. She'd posted photos on social media of sunsets and cafe tables. She looked well. The arrhythmia, apparently, wasn't interfering with her travel. Studio V's New York headquarters opened in September. In a building I had helped design 7 years ago, before I had a husband, before I had a ring, before I fully understood what it costs to make yourself smaller for someone else's comfort. The opening was on a Thursday evening. Zoe had it catered beautifully. Dr. Brannigan came. Several longtime clients came. Leonard flew in from Cincinnati and stood near the windows looking at the Manhattan skyline with his hands in his pockets and didn't say much, which for him meant more than any words would have. A journalist from the Times had run a profile the Sunday before the opening. It mentioned Studio V's founding architect by name, my name, for the first time in print. 8 years of anonymity, by choice. It felt strange to see my name there on the page, like hearing your own voice played back on a recording and recognizing it only after a delay. I framed the article. I didn't hang it on the wall. I put it in a flat file drawer in my office, between 2 sheets of archival tissue. That was enough. The adoption was finalized in November, 14 months after the night at the Four Seasons. Her name is Penny. She's 3 years old, born in Raleigh, with an enormous serious expression she wears when she's concentrating, and an enormous, delighted expression she wears every other moment. I fostered her for 6 months before the finalization. I hadn't planned it. A social worker I'd met through a pro bono housing project asked if I was open to an emergency placement, and I said yes before I'd fully thought it through, which is how I make most of the decisions that turn out to be right. Penny calls me Mama. She's been doing it for 4 months, and it still catches me off guard, in the best possible way. Like light through a window you forgot was there. On a Saturday in late November, we went to the farmer's market 2 blocks from our apartment in Brooklyn. Penny's found an enormous orange ginkgo leaf on the sidewalk and held it up to me with both hands, completely delighted. Like she'd discovered something the rest of the world had missed entirely. I crouched down and looked at it seriously with her, because she was being serious about it. Beautiful, I said. She agreed. She carried it all the way home, held very carefully in both small hands. I don't follow what Dorian is doing. I don't look it up. Zoe occasionally mentions things, that the federal investigation is still ongoing, that a Sostner project collapsed entirely, that he sold the penthouse. I nod and go back to whatever I was doing. I know he drove past the Brooklyn Farmers Market once. A colleague of Zoe's who recognized his face saw him sitting in a parked car half a block down the street, just sitting there. Zoe told me and then looked at me carefully, waiting to see what I'd do with the information. I thanked her. I went back to the floor plan I was reviewing. Whatever Dorian is looking for on that street, I hope for his sake he eventually stops looking for it in my direction. I am not there anymore. I have not been there for a long time. The morning light in Brooklyn in late November comes in sideways and warm through the kitchen window, and Penny sits at the table with her cereal and her serious face, And the ginkgo trees on our street outside are exactly the color of the leaf she carried home from the market. I pour my coffee. I sit across from her. She shows me a drawing she made, something that might be a house or a rocket ship, or possibly both at once. And she explains it to me in tremendous detail with great authority. I listen to every word. This is the life. Not the one I planned. The one I built, from the rubble of the one I thought I wanted, piece by deliberate piece, until it was sturdy and mine and full of light.